Pete, welcome to the 200th Synod of the William Khama District. We are very grateful that you have joined us today for this very brief conversation. We want to note that we aren't going to be able to get into all the details, but we want to mark, at this special Synod, we want to mark the 200th anniversary of this group of Methodists meeting in this way. And so we're grateful that you are here. You're a retired Methodist minister. You live in the district of the Cape of Good Hope and you worship at Plumstead. And so it's lovely to have you come and join us and be part of us. One of the reasons we asked if you would be with us today is that you did your doctorate on William Shaw, on Methodist mission and theology around that between the years of 1820 and 1834. I love the title of your doctorate, Settlers, Missionaries and Converts. And so we just want to kind of pick your brain a little for a few minutes. We're going to observe some other things today to help us mark this moment, but this brief sacred conversation is a gift to us. So thank you for being here.
If I may, if you'd allow me to greet my friend and colleague, Bishop Leleki. We taught together at the seminary, and I want to wish the Synod well and wish my bishop well.
Thank you so very much. We appreciate those greetings. So, Pete, if I can jump in because our time is so short, I think we're very conscious of some of the European settlers who arrived in the 17th century. We know that John Wesley lived from 1703 to 1791. And I find it quite remarkable that within just about 30 years of Wesley's death, there were already missionaries in the name of the Methodist Church or the Methodist movement traveling to further shores to come and share the gospel. Tell us a little bit of how Methodism came to be in Southern Africa, and particularly perhaps the Eastern Cape.
Yes, there were two branches of Methodism, one headed for Cape Town. My particular focus were those who came to the Eastern Cape. The Napoleonic Wars ended. People flooded back to England, and England grappled with the problem of unemployment. All these soldiers who'd fought in wars went home and discovered there was no work. In fact, one historian noted that at the time, just outside of London, there were about 45,000 unemployed men rioting in the streets, asking the government to give them work and give them employment. And at the same time, halfway around the world, the Cape colonial governor, Lord Charles Somerset, saw a solution for a problem he had and thought of transplanting some of these discontented Englishmen to the Eastern Cape, because he wanted to secure the Fish River as the border to the colony. And if he could settle people along the Fish River, then he would have a buffer zone. Our particular interest lay with one of the parties that applied to come, the party of Hezekiah Sefton. This group was sponsored by the Great Queen Street Wesleyan Chapel in London. They registered themselves as the United Wesleyan Methodist Society, and their chaplain was the Reverend William Shaw. And so on the 6th of February 1820, they sailed for the Cape Colony on the good ship Aurora, the first party of Methodists to set off for the Eastern Cape. I have a quote here. William Shaw wrote in his journal, "I'm entering into the missionary vineyard. May God make me a good and successful laborer therein. I am full of missionary feelings."
And so, Pete, just quickly to ask you, William Shaw's intent was to head for Algoa Bay. He wasn't exploring like some of the other explorers had.
Nope. He was clear that he believed God had called him to be a missionary. He wanted to be a missionary in the Eastern Cape. In fact, from the beginning, his dream was to cross that Fish River, be a missionary to indigenous people. But he came out literally as a missionary or as a chaplain to a party of settlers who then landed in Angola Bay on the 15th of May, 1820. And I must say, they got off that ship seasick, horrified at how hard the trip was, and determined never to get back on a ship again.
And you mentioned Fish River. Was the Fish River a defined boundary already for kind of the colonialists, as it were? Had they already established that?
When the Dutch first came, they had heard of this Fish River and decided it sounded like a good border. And they found some local Amaxhosa group and got them to sign a treaty in the late 1700s, which quite clearly was a bit of sleight of hand, because I don't think the indigenous people understood the concept of treaty or the concept of giving land away. This was traditional grazing land. However, that became the established wisdom, that the Fish River was to be the border. And so when the English conquered the Dutch, they received the news, the Fish River is the border. They were puzzled that the Xhosa kept crossing the Fish River, puzzled that they kept wanting to graze their cattle on the wrong side of the Fish River. Clearly, the indigenous people had no concept that this was no longer their land. And a defining moment was Colonel Graham, who led a military force to clear the territory. He was awful. The quote, he told his soldiers to apply a necessary degree of terror, and he literally killed everybody he found on the wrong side of the Fish River, and people fled across the river.
And this is the same Graham, Colonel Graham, after whom Grahamstown used to be named.
Yeah, and I mean, my opinion says naming Grahamstown, you name the town after a bloodthirsty terrorist.
Yeah. So let's get back to William Shaw quickly, because it'd be lovely to go down some of those tragic roads. But so William Shaw has this understanding that the Fish River is a significant boundary. He sees himself as wanting to try and go across that and move into different territories, but stuff happens. Is that right?
So the guys get on wagons. They drive north of Algoa Bay. Initially, they settle at a place called Reed Fountain. Immediately, they begin building huts, digging fields. They've been given seed. They plant their seed. And a month later, Major General Colin Campbell relocates them because he likes that land and tells them that he is expropriating the land in the name of the Queen, the King. And so they move on, and their final destination is in the Assegai River Valley. On the 18th of July, they establish the village of Salem, and they become known now as the Salem Party.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just to check, so in terms of Methodist history, is there a Methodist church or gathering in Cape Town or in the Cape, or is this the first? So there is already something in the Cape. Cape
Town has been running itself under the direction of the Wesleyan Missionary Society. They have expanded up the west coast. This expansion up the east coast of Africa is entirely independent and was driven really by the 1820 settler program.
So Salem isn't the origin of Methodism in Southern Africa, but it is the origin of Methodism in the Eastern Cape.
Yes.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
William Shaw, I mean, I read his life, and I have to, in some ways, admire this man who was driven by a call from God. When he left England, his parents said, "Can you leave one of your sons behind? Because we're afraid the ship is going to sink on your way to Africa." So he left his oldest son behind with the grandparents, just in case he didn't make it. I mean, I cannot imagine what that must feel like. William Shaw arrives in Salem. There is nothing. He literally has to build his own manse with no congregation to support him, because there was no congregation. He lives in a tent with his wife. He starts to collect a congregation. They meet under a tree. He starts to build a manse, and 6 months later celebrates he's managed to build one room into which he moves his pregnant wife. And in 1821, their daughter, Elizabeth, is born. I just wonder if we as Methodist ministers would be happy to be told, build your own house, find your own congregation, raise your own stipend, and you can live in a tent in the meantime.
Yeah, the challenge. So
Yes.
Pete, just again, because our time is short, we want to know, did William Shaw ever make it across the Fish River?
So he spent 2 years gathering the settlers together, establishing preaching places, raising up local preachers, but his dream always was to cross that Fish River. The governor was not happy. The governor said, that Fish River is a definite line and no one shall cross it, either cross from the Xhosa side or cross from the settler side. Shaw went to the governor. The governor turned him down and said, you may not go. So Shaw found a gap. When the governor was on leave, he went to the deputy who was standing in, Governor Donkin, and he got permission to cross the border. And so Shaw and his wife and William Shepston and his wife and family, November the 23rd, cross the Fish River. There's these famous words recorded by Anne Shaw, William Shaw's wife, let us go in the name of the Lord. And I am impressed, the sense of faith, because they crossed into the unknown. They did not know how they'd be received. They had to learn isiXhosa. They had no clue of the culture or the people they were going to be amongst. They literally packed their wagons, dragged them through the Fish River Valley, and set off for the home of Chief Pato and their first mission station. They got given permission to establish a mission station, which obviously had to be called Wesleyville because they were Wesleyans, which was near Peddy. Shaw records on the 30th of January 1825 that 2 cottages had been erected, a chapel was built, there were 30 children in the Sunday school, and on the 22nd of March, the first Methodist class meeting was held, attended by 6 converts from the amaXhosa people.
So, fascinating. It's 1825. It rings a bell because if you do your maths, 1825 plus 200 ends up kind of where we are now.
There you go.
So that's kind of the origin, eh?
Shaw then... So let's talk about the complication. Shaw clearly believed in the authority of the king. Shaw clearly understood the authority of the empire. At no point did he ever question whether the empire should come to Africa or not, or whether the empire should have asked whether the amaXhosa people really wanted anyone there. But he was a good pastor, a pastor who cared for his converts. He lived amongst his people. He learned their language. He made friends with the various chiefs. In January 1824, he arranged a meeting between Henry Somerset, the commandant, and the chiefs, Ndlambe, Dushana, Mkwaye, Patu, and Kama. And they had this conversation about how to maintain a peaceful border. As I understand Shaw, his concern was not that we must withdraw from this territory because he could not conceive of it, but his concern was that there should be peace along the border. And in the process made friends with Chief Kama, who was the brother of Chief Patu and a very influential person.
Is that Chief Kama, the Kama that after whom we are named, as it were? Is that the same person?
Exactly, yes. Kama himself is fascinated by Shaw, listens to his stories. Kama's wife, it would seem, already had some understanding of Christian faith. She had been influenced by the preaching of Nsikana. Kama would watch his wife pray and was impressed by this. And there came the moment where he accepted an invitation from Shaw himself to cross the Fish River and go to Grahamstown. A very risky thing, because he understood the power of this river, and going to Grahamstown was no small thing. But he goes to Grahamstown. At Shaw's invitation, he attends church, the Central Methodist Church in Grahamstown. This chief and his advisors go to church. It's a communion service. He comes away convinced that there is a faith here that he can work with. It's complicated. He never abandoned who he was. He never lost his culture, except in one thing. He chose not to take on more than one wife, which the other chiefs simply didn't understand. But it would seem that something happened in Kama's life, and he in fact became a preacher. When there were no preachers available, he wasn't above preaching himself. This interesting thing of these two Williams, William Shaw, William Kama, each crossing the Fish River into the unknown, risking themselves for this thing they do not know.
So the Fish River becomes a lovely metaphor of sorts of courage and of faith, I suppose.
It does. And maybe a metaphor for our faith as Methodists, because I do think our tradition invites us to step into the unknown. I think back to who we are, where we had this big debate in the 1960s about whether we would racially divide ourselves, and we said we won't. A step into the unknown, because the Dutch Reformed Church at that time and the powers that be in the country were wanting us to go in one direction, and we said we will not submit ourselves to apartheid. A discussion again in the 70s where we took a step into the unknown by ordaining the first woman. A really scary process. Some of our members left because they said we will never have a woman talking to us. Another step into the unknown with the journey to new land and questions of what might a new chapter in our life as Methodists look like. And so I like the metaphor, and I might, on the 200th anniversary, invite us to ask ourselves, what might the next step into the unknown be? Because Rowan, let's admit, we would all rather stick with what we know. We'd all rather, let me use examples, we'd rather sing the hymns we know than step out and sing songs that aren't ours. We would rather stick with the preachers we know than be open to hearing preachers of other traditions. And yet here we have William Shaw willing to cross the Fish River into the unknown, and God takes that and grows a mission. Or William Kama willing to cross the Fish River, step into a Grahamstown he did not know, and God took that, and in fact William Kama flourished. There were other tribal groupings that were massacred by the British Army. Kama managed successfully to negotiate a security for his people because he had taken that risk. Perhaps in 2025, beyond 200 years, we could ask this question: what is the next river we need to cross? Sorry, I sound like I'm preaching out.
Well, I mean, we have to bring it to a close, but I do find that very helpful to sit and think that we are human beings like they were human beings, and that they were willing, your point about William Shaw taking great risks and William Kama in his own way taking his own risks, and people really believe in, if you like, not only in God, but in a cause, believing in something that was worth it and giving themselves for it. And it might be that one of the appropriate ways for us to mark these 200 years is to consider both institutionally, what are we as a district, what are we as a connection, What are we as our local circuits and societies? What are our fish rivers that we need to cross that will help us? And perhaps you can correct me on this, and then we'll finish, or just guide me. But saying, what are our fish rivers that through which we can express courage and faith? Is there anything else that a fish river might be other than the expression of courage and faith that you might want to finish with it for us?
So here's the thought that really strikes me. William Shaw was not perfect. He carried all the flaws of his culture with him. Yet we can recognize that God was at work. William Calmer was not perfect. And historically, we can deconstruct both of them and point out their failings. But actually, I would invite us, who also are deeply flawed, to be willing to say, Lord, here am I, use me, and discover how God can use us, not because we have it perfectly together, but because we're willing to take courage in our hands and step out.
Pete, thank you so much for your time. I wish we could have made this longer. And God bless you. So from one shiny bald head to another, I greet you in the name of the Lord, and God be with you. Take care.